Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Inside Injuries podcast for Week 8 of the NFL season. Remember, Inside Injuries is where you get the inside edge on injuries around the NFL and in other sports as well. Be sure to check out our NBA coverage uh, as the season progresses. My name is Tim McCullough. I'm your host here, and with me, as always, from Inside Injuries is Virginia Zakis. Virginia, how are you this afternoon?
Doing well, just trying to stay on top of all of these injuries and practice updates and everything as the week goes on.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if you guys actually track this, but are there more injuries this year than in past years?
Unfortunately, I don't know the numbers, but it seems like this year there's less season-ending injuries to the top players, but a lot more injuries we're dealing with to, the top 300 fantasy players. Every week it just seems like there's something new. So definitely seems like there's a lot more going on this year.
Yeah, I agree with you on the season-ending piece. And I was looking through my fantasy teams. The only guy I really lost for the season was Jimmy Garoppolo. I really haven't lost anybody else, or at least nobody else who might come back. I mean, there are some guys who may come back later on.
Yeah, actually, we're about at the time too where we're getting guys like Elijah McGuire and there's some other ones, hopefully Dante Foreman, and there's some others hopefully who'll be coming back that haven't played yet this season. So
All right, and I think we're going to talk about some of those players a little bit later. For now, let's move on to some of the guys that have been out for quite some time, and fantasy owners are anxiously awaiting to see whether or not these guys are going to come back at all. Specifically, I'm talking about Dalvin Cook, um, the Vikings. Are we ever going to see him on the field again? What's the story with Cook?
so it seems like the Vikings are going to follow the Jags lead and sit him out through their bye week, which is a great decision. Even if a week from now he feels like he's healthy and he's good to go, sit him a few more weeks. Hamstring strains just never seem to fully heal. Players feel like they're healthy. They start sprinting, cutting, they're feeling okay. They can get back to like that 90-95%, but it just seems like they never quite get back to 100%. So sitting him through their bye is a great decision. I think after that, he should be healthy enough to return. Still going to be an elevated injury risk, and probably won't be fully recovered until the off season. But I think by sitting him out for the next month, he's gonna get close to full strength and will finally be a contributor in the second half of the season.
And a similar situation is Leonard Fournette. Is he going to be coming back anytime soon, or is it possible that we may lose him for the season?
Yeah, I think he's pretty similar to Dalvin Cook. Um, but the difference I would say is Dalvin Cook was obviously coming off that ACL tear, and when players come back from an injury like this, often their knee is fine, but the rest of their body has to catch up, and I think that's what led to his hamstring tear or hamstring strain. Fournette, on the other hand, just always seems to be dealing with injuries. Back in college, it was his ankle. Last year, it was his ankle and foot. So he's just one of those players that kind of always seems to be banged up. So for him, I'm more concerned because if it's not his hamstring and that's fully recovered, it could be something else. His ankle could flare up again. It really could be anything.
Yeah, I think a lot of people when the Jags went out and traded for Carlos Hyde, I think a lot of people were suspicious that maybe Fournette's injury is a lot worse than the team is letting on. Do you think that that's possible that might be the case?
I think it's possible, but I also feel like they would have put him on IR by now if, there really was a significant tear to the hamstring or they thought they were looking at an injury that would take a few months to heal. Um, but I actually see this as very good news because hopefully, even when Fournette returns, it means they won't be handing him the ball 30 times. Maybe Hyde still gets 10 touches and it cuts back on Fournette's carries a little bit, and that'll just help preserve him through the rest of the year.
Yeah, and a lot of our listeners, of course, have been asking about the fantasy value of these players once they start to return. In terms of Cook, I think there's still potential there for him to be an RB1. And if he comes back and he's fully healthy, as he should be, if they wait until after the Week 10 bye, I think what happens is guys like Murray, who've been putting up RB1 like numbers the last couple of weeks, will suddenly lose their value. And I think it's also important to keep in mind that, you know, Murray put up those kind of numbers, more than 20 fantasy points against teams like Arizona and the Jets. Uh, the the Vikings have a much tougher schedule ahead, with the exception of two games against the Lions. They've really got a tough road to hoe the rest of the way. So while I think Cook could come back and have some really good value, I think Murray's value is in real jeopardy, except for two games against the Lions going forward. So, if Cook doesn't come back and it ends up being Murray for the rest of the way, uh, I think he's going to have a tough rest of the season. And as far as the Jaguars go, I think even when Fournette does come back, I don't think I want anything to do with that backfield. I think at best, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think what they're going to do is they're going to look to preserve Fournette's health and spread out the workload among those three running backs, among the three of them, Fournette, Hyde, and also Yeldon will still remain in the mix. It's going to be a true committee, which is going to take away from the fantasy value of all three players, really. So that's one situation I want to avoid. If, in fact, I would advise fantasy owners who are hanging on to Fournette, hoping that that he's going to bring them something over the second half in terms of big time production. I would say you need to temper your expectations and should consider unloading him if you can get decent value in trade. All right, moving on. Let's talk a little bit about Sony Michel. A lot of speculation about his injury, whether it's his old back injury that has gotten worse again, or whether the new injury to the knee is something that just kind of re-aggravated his old injury, or if he's done some additional damage. A lot of people have a lot of questions about Michel going forward. Can you tell us what you know, Virginia?
So obviously, it was a very scary looking injury. It was to his left knee, which is the same one where he suffered a torn ACL back in, I believe, 2011, and then also had that arthroscopic surgery over the summer. So a very concerning history of problems with that knee. Now, the good news is they said the MRI showed no structural damage. That is slightly misleading because there's a good chance he's still dealing with a sprain, which actually means there is a slight bit of ligament damage, just wouldn't need surgery. Um, or it's possible there's some cartilage or meniscus damage. So, not entirely clear what he's dealing with, but right now we're picking up a grade 2 injury, and that means he needs to sit for at least 4 weeks. It does not look like he's going to play this week. He's doubtful, hasn't practiced yet. And I think the Patriots are going to take a cautious approach with him. They really should not rush him back based on his history of knee problems. And at this point, it's more important to look towards the postseason and try to get him healthy for that. But he really is one of those players throughout his career. I think we're going to hear multiple times every season about issues with his knee, whether it's something like this, where you see a specific play that he gets hurt on, or it just kind of flares up on him and he misses some practice time. This is good news is this one is not overly serious, but this is not something that's just going to go away.
Yeah. And again, our listeners, a lot of our listeners are asking about what's going to happen with James White. Is he actually going to see a bump in value because of this? And what kind of approach do you think that the Patriots might take with their backfield now? I think it's very telling that they haven't brought really anybody in the last week or so to audition to add depth to the roster. I think they're going to go with White and hope that he can carry them until Michel returns. But I also think that fantasy owners should temper their expectations there as well. I don't know that White's going to gain any additional value. He's already pretty highly valued. He's coming in as RB8 so far, which is pretty darn good for a guy that you could have gotten maybe in the fifth or sixth round of drafts. I think what we're going to probably see is we're going to see some Kenyon Barner. He hasn't been bad. He hasn't been great. I mean, 3.9 yards per carry. He can certainly spell White on some of the early downs because they want White in there for third down. That's really his big specialty, third down and catching passes out of the backfield. I think you'll sort of see Barner and White splitting off those first two downs and sort of sharing the workload there. And then White will continue to produce as he has produced. But again, I wouldn't expect any additional value from him. And don't forget, they've also got James Devlin. He's primarily a blocking back. He's the guy who's been there and there a lot since Gronk has been out, sort of taking over Gronk's role as the extra blocker. I think you could also see him pick up some carries to sort of spell Barner and White a bit. But again, he's not someone that you can start in fantasy, and I'm not so sure that I would want to start Barner in anything but the very, very deepest of dynasty leagues. I mentioned Gronk. Let's talk about Gronk a little bit. I know he did return to practice today. Is there something more serious going on, though, than what we've been led to believe about his injuries?
There definitely could be. It's obviously not good that he is dealing with more issues with his back. This time it sounded like back spasms. Generally not a huge concern. It is something that often recurs, but that in and of itself is not a major red flag. But when you combine the back spasms with the fact that he's had, I believe, 3 back surgeries now, and this, I think, is something that we're going to see pop back up again. Of course, Gronk is one of those guys. If he's healthy, if he's active, he always has value, even when he's not healthy. So this is a tough one. I don't think honestly much has changed with him. There's going to continue to be concerns over his back. There will be for the rest of his career, however long that may be. Something to watch. See if you need to make sure he gets back out there tomorrow at practice, which would be a sign that his back responded okay to practice today. So there's still a lot to watch. And again, there's just going to be lingering concerns with his back throughout the rest of the season.
Yeah, I think though, I think one thing I've been telling fantasy owners, I think it's very safe to say that Gronk's days as the consensus number one top tight end in the league, I think those days may be over. He's only got 405 yards through 6 games so far this season. Not anywhere near the pace he would need to be on to cross the 1,000-yard mark. We've seen seasons like this from him before. 540 yards in 2016 when he was hurt. 592 yards in 2013 when he was hurt. I think we may see something less than the big time dominant tight end than we've seen in years past. As far as who might benefit from Gronk not playing as much as he's played in years past and producing as he has, the guy I think may end up stepping forward is actually Chris Hogan. If you take a look at Hogan's numbers, over the first 5 games of the season, Hogan caught 11 passes from 19 targets for 143 yards. The last 2 games, which Gronk has pretty much missed, Hogan has caught 10 of 11 targets for 141 yards, and is starting to use him in some of those over-the-middle routes that Gronk used to run. And I think we may see Hogan sort of pick up the slack for Gronk's production. Now, the problem is, as far as tight ends go, the Patriots really don't have anyone else. They've got Dwayne Allen, who's done a halfway decent job as a blocking tight end. But in terms of the passing game, he's just not the kind of threat, really, that Hogan or Gronk or really anybody else on the Patriots is. They do have Jacob Hollister, who's an interesting player, who's actually looked really good in very limited use this year. He's only played 1 game. He's had 3 targets for 3 receptions, 35 yards. And I think that Hollister may be the future for the Patriots at that position. But again, he's no Gronk, that's for sure. I really like Hogan going forward. A lot of people dropped him earlier in the year when he wasn't producing. I think he's worth adding now. I have a funny feeling that what we've seen over the last 2 weeks is something that we're going to continue to see from Hogan. I'm sort of alone on an island in believing in that, but I do believe it. I think he's worth adding if you've got the roster space for him. All right, Marshawn Lynch. nobody was really surprised to see him go on injured reserve this past week. I think we all knew he was banged up and that he needed to get a break. The big question, though, for fantasy owners is whether they should hang on to him, and is there a chance he's going to come back?
So we don't know exactly what's going on. It could be either a very serious strain or it's possible he's dealing with a sports hernia, although they haven't given us any indication that he's going to undergo surgery at this point. Either way, we're showing a grade 3 injury, and that comes with an 8-week optimal recovery time. So medically, that means yes, he could return, but with the way their season is going and at his age and with his injury history, I just don't see it happening. So I don't think he's going to come back, even if he was, pretty close to fully recovered. Time to let him go. And even if he did come back, it's the kind of thing it'd take him at least a few weeks to kind of get back into things. So I don't think he'd be very productive if he did return.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you there. I don't see Lynch, and considering his history too, and his this is a man who walked away from the game at one point. I don't see him fighting his way back to play again this year. That's just sort of more of a personal outlook than anything else. As far as who to own, though, on the Raiders, if you're looking to replace Lynch, if you need another running back, who's the guy who's going to be the one you want to start for the rest of the season? The guy that I'm looking at really is Jalen Richard. I think he's the guy that you want to own. Yeah, we're getting lots of coach speak about Doug Martin being the guy who's going to carry the rock and all that. And that may very well be the case. He's probably going to be the primary running back as far as carries goes. But I think the guy that you want to own is Richard, and I think he's actually got the chance to be very similar to White in terms of his production. This is a guy so far, he's averaging 8.2 yards per completion. He's caught 31 of his 37 targets this season, and he's been really terrific out of the backfield for them. And now this is a team that has traded away Amari Cooper, their top wide receiver. They've now lost Marshawn Lynch, who is arguably their most dynamic running back, and they traded away Khalil Mack to basically cripple their defense earlier this year. This is a team that is essentially playing for next year. John Gruden's kind of made that clear to his team, and these guys, they're ready to walk out and quit on him. So with that in mind, I think that the Raiders are going to be playing a lot of their games the rest of the way from behind. They're going to have a tough time keeping up with the offenses of the other teams. They're going to have to throw the ball a lot more often, and that creates a game script that plays right into Jalen Richard's hands. The potential there is for him to become a pass catching back who puts up the kind of numbers that James White has been putting up this year. I definitely think the possibility is there. I wouldn't count on a lot of touchdowns from him, but I think he could produce some decent yardage. So he's the guy that I think you really want to have going forward. All right, Virginia, we want to get some thoughts, some quick thoughts on some of the other running backs, some of the other injuries that are around. Let's start with Matt Breida of the 49ers, who aggravated his ankle injury last week. Is he actually going to play this week?
I really hope this is finally the week that the 49ers decide to shut him down and give him a week off. We got a lot of heat for saying that he shouldn't play in week 6 when, of course, he went off and had a monster day. And then 5 plays into week 7, he hurt his ankle again. So we weren't accurate that first week, but in general, we knew that he was at a very high risk of getting injured again. That's what happened. Really, really hope he doesn't play this week. We're actually showing a 4-week optimal recovery time from when he re-aggravated the injury, which means he really shouldn't return until week 11. So I think he's truly questionable for this week, but definitely should not play.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you there that I think they're finally going to get smart with Breida. I also think they want to get a look at what they've got on the bench. Raheem Mostert has been absolutely terrific over the last 2 games. 146 rushing yards on 19 carries. That's 7.7 yards per carry over the last two games for Mostert. I wouldn't be surprised to see them try and work him in more and maybe give Breida a break, especially since really they're not playing for this season anymore. They're really playing for pride at this point and to get a look at what they've got for next season. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Breida get a break and Mostert be worked in a little bit more. Marlon Mack finally had the big breakout game that we've been waiting, I don't know, better part of 2 seasons for. Uh, what do you think about him going forward? Is he going to be able to stay healthy?
We got bad news today on Mac. Yesterday, he was limited at practice with an ankle injury. Didn't seem like much of a concern that he missed practice today. Midweek downgrades are never a good thing. We're going to have to watch his practice participation very closely tomorrow. I would consider him very, very questionable for this upcoming week. And unfortunately, this is one of those cases. Marlon Mack last week was an elevated injury risk with a peak health performance factor, meaning still some risk he's going to get hurt, but we expected him to play very well. None of his past injuries, that past hamstring strain, he was at a point where that shouldn't hold him back, and it didn't. But of course, that elevated injury risk was spot on. Now also dealing with the ankle injury, and he's back at a high injury risk and a lot more concern going forward.
And naturally, I had him as a start for this week in this week's Start Sit article. Um, so it'll be interesting to see what happens with him going forward. And yes, we're definitely going to have to keep an eye on him over the next couple of days, right, Virginia? All right, Cooper Kupp. Is he going to be back this week?
So he's making progress, but still doubtful for this week. From the beginning, we've been saying he needs 4 weeks for his MCL sprain to fully heal. We're sticking by that. So hoping for a return probably 2 to 3 weeks from now, he can safely get back out there.
Yeah, and I think it's worth you mentioned that we caught a little bit of heat for our outlook on players in the past who put up big games and then suddenly got injured the next game. Let's tell our listeners one more time, what is the difference between our optimal return date and the date that they may actually come back?
Sure. So our optimal return date, optimal recovery time, is more about medically when a player should be healthy enough to return. Many players return before their optimal recovery time, and they often either underperform or they get re-injured, they aggravate the same injury, or suffer another injury because they're trying to overcompensate. That's exactly what Matt Breida did. We saw it with Dalvin Cook, Leonard Fournette. All these guys that keep getting hurt have all returned before they hit that optimal recovery time. It's obviously tough because they want to get out there. They want to help their team. But in reality, a lot of these players are causing more damage long term by trying to get back out there too soon.
Right, and that optimal return time, that really just kind of provides context for the health performance factor. Is that not correct?
Yep. Health performance factor is mainly based on that optimal recovery time. Players' overall injury risk is also very much based on their past injuries. Health performance factor is more this week, if they play, how do we expect them to perform? And much of that does rely on that healthy to return date.
All right. One more player I want to ask you about, Virginia, and that's Melvin Gordon. Are we looking at a situation that could turn into another Dalvin Cook, Fournette sort of thing?
I am cautiously optimistic that Melvin Gordon is going to be all right because they did not play him last week, and now he has the bye week. So that'll give him over 2 full weeks to recover. If it's a mild strain, it's a 2-week optimal recovery time, so he should hit that. If it is a moderate strain and it's more serious than they're letting on, that means the optimal recovery time is closer to 4 weeks, and he shouldn't play after the bye. But for right now, I'm feeling okay about Melvin Gordon, but need to watch him closely.
Excellent. All right. Great to hear that. All right. You've been listening to the Inside Injuries podcast for week 8 of the NFL season. Remember, you can send us your questions on Twitter at Inside Injuries. And you can also send your questions to me on Twitter, and that's at Tim's Tens. That's at TIMSTENZ. And if you'd like, you can send your questions to Virginia as well. Virginia, please give your Twitter handle.
At VZakas, Zakas.
All right, terrific. Remember, Inside Injuries is where you get the inside edge on injuries all around the NFL. Don't start your lineups until you check out our start sit articles, our rankings, and the injury roundups that Virginia puts out every week prior to the Sunday games. All right, Virginia, thank you very much. Great to see you again, and we'll be back for next week.